Welcome to Artificially Intelligent Marketing, a weekly podcast where we stay on top of the latest trends, tips, and tools in the world of marketing AI, helping you get the best results from your marketing efforts. Now let's join our hosts, Paul Avery and Martin Broadhurst.
Welcome to the Artificially Intelligent Marketing Podcast. I'm Martin Broadhurst, and today I am flying solo. That's right, my regular co-host Paul Avery is not joining us in this episode. Instead, he had to take a bit of a breather after many weeks of intensive AI announcements. He just couldn't hack it, and quite frankly, he had to just take a bit of a lie down in the Caribbean sun. So, Paul, I hope you are feeling refreshed and ready to go next week, because if this week is anything to go by, the relentless deluge of AI news and announcements is not going away anytime soon. In this week's episode, we are going to be talking about 4 big stories. First thing we're going to look at is Italy banning ChatGPT. We'll also be looking at Meta's announcement of the Segment Anything foundational model for computer vision. We'll then be looking at the comments made by Sundar Pichai this week as he dismissed the AI chatbot threat posed by the likes of ChatGPT and Bing AI. And then we'll be looking at the AI Index report measuring trends in artificial intelligence before wrapping up this week's episode with a fascinating long-form interview. Let's kick off with the first story of this week then. Italy has banned ChatGPT. Last week's episode of the podcast was called ChatGPT Under Fire. Little did we know when we recorded that little more than 72 hours after we published the episode, a country would ban ChatGPT outright. So Italy's Data Protection Authority has criticised OpenAI for not checking user ages and said that there's been massive personal data collection during the training of the model. So OpenAI immediately blocked access to Italian users in response. Now, this has obviously upset quite a few Italian users. It didn't take long to find people on Twitter saying, "What on earth is going on?" So OpenAI has actually this week sat down and had talks with the Italian data protection authorities, and they're presenting remedial measures that hope to mitigate and allay the concerns of the authorities. The company has sent over a document outlining measures to address these issues, and I think they are hoping that they can get up and running very soon. Now, why does this matter? Well, Italy isn't the only country with concerns regarding ChatGPT. In fact, Germany this week has signaled that it may also look to block access to ChatGPT. Now, what I personally find slightly confusing about this story is, as far as I can tell, ChatGPT is the only model that has been restricted, and Bing AI has not seen any limitations put on it. And as far as I can tell, models such as Google's Bard, whilst I realise it's only a small audience at the moment, that has not had any restrictions either. So it seems like the authorities in the EU are really pushing to get the new technology providers in this space to basically increase transparency. A big concern is obviously around the way that they use people's data. They scrape the internet, and all of the data that they're able to find goes into the training set. Yet nobody knows what that data contains. We do know that if you search for people's names and you search for companies, it's able to access and present relevant information about people. You don't need to be a high profile figure to come up in the outputs of ChatGPT. I've tried this with relatively small businesses and the CEOs of SMEs that I'm aware of, and it can tell you who somebody is. So we know that it is using this kind of data, and the lack of transparency around the large language models training data, particularly GPT-4, which OpenAI has been very secretive with, is a cause for concern for many. So I think this really is just the start of what we can expect to see from European privacy regulators. And no doubt before long, they will start to coordinate their actions across the EU. And we can expect to see companies having to make significant adjustments in the way that they open their books, so to speak, and let you interrogate their models. We can expect to see serious changes in this regard in the near future. What does this mean for marketers? Well, watch this space, really. The legislation and regulation around AI is nascent, as we discussed in great detail last week. I think we can expect to see the EU taking a leading role in this. Their policy papers at the moment suggest that companies using and developing AI models are going to have to be more transparent and more open with the training data and the weights and biases that they use within their models. All of which I think will be a good thing in the long term. But when you have a transformative technology like ChatGPT that really does capture the imagination of huge amounts of people all around the world, any restriction on that can just seem draconian. But I'm sure it's all done for the best, with the best of intentions for the citizens of the EU. While we're talking about tech giants and their AI models that might come in for some scrutiny, we might as well talk about Meta. This week, Facebook's parent company Meta announced Segment Anything, a new foundational model for computer vision. So the Segment Anything model, also known as SAM, is a 1 billion mask dataset. Now, the aim of this, as they say in their release paper, is to democratize image segmentation. Now, if you don't know a great deal about computer vision, it's not an area that you're familiar with, it's basically the technology or the machine learning models that allow computers to see and interpret what they are seeing. It plays a role in things like self-driving cars. They'll have cameras that will detect objects and classify the objects that they're looking at. Things like that is a car, that is a lamppost, that is a pedestrian. Or they can be used in, recently saw a great example where AI computer vision was being used to identify bugs in an insect farm. And it was looking at the creatures on the insect farm and able to identify which of those were injured or maybe had illnesses. Really interesting, innovative area. In more everyday usage, you might come across computer vision when you're unlocking your iPhone. The face unlock feature is using computer vision technology behind that. But the new Segment Anything foundational model from Meta is designed to enable developers to incorporate this new technology into their apps at scale. And it's what really sets it apart from existing data sets is just the sheer volume of the segmentation masks. You can think of a segmentation mask as being like on a coloring book page where you might just color in only the shape of the object that you're interested in. So if there's a cat on that coloring page, you would color in the cat and leave everything else on the page white. And doing that, kind of feeding that into the computer, will help the computer understand where the object is in the picture and then separate it out from the background. So the more examples of masks that you've given to the model, the better it is at identifying objects within a scene and being able to separate them out from one another. In the example that they give in the research announcement, they actually say that it has 400 times segmentation masks compared to the next best model. So it's a huge increase in the data that it's got to work with. Now, they give some examples of what you can actually do with all of this. They in the section on the announcement page, they say what lies ahead. And they've got some nice little illustrations where, for instance, you could be using AR glasses. So you're using augmented reality glasses, and they could prompt the users with reminders and instructions based on what the person is looking at. And the example that they actually give is somebody working in a kitchen, and in front of them in the kitchen is a chopping board with a cake on the side which has not been iced. And in the top corner, on the augmented reality glasses, the user sees videos suggesting cake decorating tips, because it recognizes that there is an undecorated cake and kind of pulls out some relevant advice. There's another example where there is an empty dog bowl, food bowl on the floor, and the glasses see this bowl and it's empty, and it pops up with a notification saying that Rex was fed 20 minutes ago. So it's context aware. There are industrial applications for this, many of these that you could think of, but in the examples that they give, they talk about using it for agriculture to be able to assist farmers kind of managing their herds, or you could use it if you're a biologist, and this is something I'd love to discuss in the future with Paul, if you were looking at cell division or any kind of life sciences application that really, you need to be able to count cells rapidly. I don't know why I'm talking about this as if I have any idea what I'm on about. This is so much in Paul's domain that I should just reference the fact that I'm looking at a GIF with some cells moving on it right now. And apparently it's going to be really useful for that. We'll talk more about that in the future with Paul when he's back in the studio. Suffice to say, this is a really interesting new technology that's going to open up huge areas of innovation and allow people to do so much more with their existing products. There's going to be applications in the security industry. You can well imagine how this is going to be integrated into things like CCTV, how it's going to help things like crowd control. The TV and movie industry is obviously going to be able to make great use of this. Self-driving cars, which do need to be able to see objects, track objects, and classify objects, are about to get quite an upgrade as well. So the impact of this is not to be understated. And I think it's worth saying at this point that Meta deserve some credit, because this model has actually been released with the Apache 2 license, which is a permissive open license. So this means that anyone can use the model and developers can build with it now. The Apache 2 license allows for free use, modification, and distribution of the software. So that makes it accessible for a wide range of applications and research purposes. So hats off to Meta for that. In fact, the top comment that I saw when I read the tweet announcing this was from somebody saying, that's all great, but you should have led with the fact it's an Apache 2 license. Wow. Next up, I want to look at a recent interview that Sundar Pichai gave with the Wall Street Journal. The CEO of Alphabet has come out on a bit of a PR front after Google has faced significant pushback or criticism for its lack of innovation and basically it's, to address the threat that it may or may not be facing from the likes of ChatGPT and Bing AI. I mentioned that it's faced some criticism and that people are saying that it is under threat, but that's not how Sundar Pichai sees it. If anything, he actually dismisses and minimizes the chatbot threat. He says that they see opportunity in the space. He says the opportunity is, if anything, bigger than before. Now, he does say that Google will be enabling users to engage with large language models in a search context, and that they are currently testing new search products, specifically ones that allow people to ask follow-up questions. So maybe we're going to see a more chat-like interface when it comes to Google search results. When asked why Google hadn't responded or released a chatbot earlier, why it was maybe resting on its laurels, He said that they were iterating and preparing to ship something, and that maybe the timelines had changed given the moment in the industry that we saw back on November 30th last year when ChatGPT came to the fore. He does say that there has been incredible user excitement and goes on to say that this is interesting for the company. He says, it has been incredible to see user excitement around adoption of these technologies, and that is a pleasant surprise as well. Now, it remains to be seen exactly how Google does deploy AI in this space. It's a topic of conversation that we've had in recent weeks, talking about what does this mean for search engine optimization. That was an interesting discussion that I caught up with on Twitter this week as well, where Chris Penn from Trust Insights was saying that the era of unbranded search content is coming to an end. Branded search will be the primary driver of traffic. And in a few years' time, when people are searching for things that they might ordinarily find on your blog, if you're doing long form content marketing, kind of inbound marketing type activity, soon those kind of answers will be found on the likes of ChatGPT and via chat AIs. So trying to optimize for that will be pointless. Now, whether that comes to pass remains to be seen. I should say apologies to Chris if I've completely misrepresented that. I feel like I've paraphrased slightly just to get that across quickly. But yeah, going back to Google for just a second, Pichai says that there are plans in place for Google Brain, the AI research lab within Google, and DeepMind, the Alphabet-owned research company headed up by Demis Hassabis. There are plans for these two organizations to collaborate more closely. And this makes sense. Pichai does say he expects a lot more stronger collaboration because some of these efforts will be more compute intensive. So it makes sense to do it at a certain scale. There has been a little bit of friction between DeepMind and Google in the past, with DeepMind not being entirely aligned with the Google mission. There's said to be a bit of distrust and a fear of misuse of DeepMind's technology by Google and or the military. Some sources also mention that there's something of a cultural conflict between DeepMind's academic researchers and Google's business-oriented engineers. So much so, in fact, that DeepMind tried to break away from Google and become a separate division under Alphabet, but negotiations on that have failed, apparently. So it will be interesting to see how they bring DeepMind and Google Brain together. Certainly feel that DeepMind have, if I go back looking over the past 10 years or so, DeepMind have always been one of these companies that have, quite frankly, are pushing the boundaries. They're the ones that are doing great things in the life sciences space. They've done some amazing work with the likes of AlphaGo. That was a great DeepMind project. So when we start to see some of their capabilities incorporated into the Google product suite, that does make you think that there's some exciting times ahead for Google. And, maybe they should have been looking to make this move some time before now, but there's nothing like a bit of healthy competition to spur things along. Our final story of the week comes from the Stanford Institute for Human-Centered Artificial Intelligence, which has released its 2023 AI Index report. The AI Index collaborates with many different organizations to track progress in artificial intelligence. These organizations include the Center for Security, Emerging Technology at Georgetown University, LinkedIn, NetBase, Quid, Lightcast, and McKinsey. The 2023 report also features more self-collected data and original analysis than ever, they tell us. So this is a big look at the broadening space that is AI, and it's tracking everything from investment rates to risks to policy and regulation, you name it. So I just want to pull out some of the top takeaways from the report to keep you up to speed with where we're at globally when it comes to AI. So a few key highlights taken from the report. First of all, industry is racing ahead of academia, and this came as no surprise to me, and I think anyone that's been paying attention in this space for a few years now will have seen this. Just all of the big announcements these days are coming out of Meta, Nvidia, OpenAI, Microsoft, etc. So the report says until 2014, most significant machine learning models were released by academia. Since then, industry has taken over. In 2022, there were 32 significant industry-produced machine learning models compared to just 3 produced by academia. It goes on to state that basically because of the huge amounts of data, the compute power, and quite frankly, the deep pockets that are required, it makes sense that industrial actors are going to need to really take up the reins here and drive things forward. Also, when you consider the massive upside from the profit motive, if you can realize the benefits from AI, it's not a great surprise to see that the incentive does exist for them to make these investments, because down the road, the returns on investment look to be pretty chunky. In what is something of a theme at the moment in some of the reports that are coming out, particularly from academia regarding AI, there is a suggestion that AI is harming the environment. Though, to be fair, this article does say that AI is both helping and harming the environment. So, not all bad. New research suggests that AI systems can have serious environmental impacts. According to one report, Bloom's training run, Bloom is a large language model. Bloom's training run emitted 25 times more carbon than a single air traveler on a one-way trip from New York to San Francisco. Which, if I'm honest, doesn't feel like a great deal to me. I actually think that sounds quite small given the potential benefits of a big large language model like Bloom. So yeah, that I understand why it needs to be highlighted, but it could be worse. It does go on to say that new reinforcement learning models like Be Cooler show that AI systems can be used to optimize energy usage. So yeah, it's not all bad. When it comes to AI and industry and jobs, a topic that we discussed last week following OpenAI's report that showed 80% of jobs will be impacted by GPT technologies by at least 10%. The report says that the demand for AI-related professional skills is increasing across virtually every American industrial sector. So no great surprise there. And it goes on to say across every sector in the United States for which there is data, with the exception of agriculture, forestry, fisheries, and hunting, the number of AI-related job posts has increased on average from 1.7% in 2021 to 1.9% in 2022. So employers in the United States are increasingly looking for workers with AI-related skills, unless, of course, you're in the world of hunting. And to be honest, I'd prefer that we just keep artificial intelligence out of hunting. That just sounds like a bad... I've seen Terminator. That just doesn't seem like a wise move at this stage. Or if we are going to do it, just keep it at GPT-3. The report also goes on to say that policymakers' interest in AI is on the rise. And this was a big topic of discussion on last week's show after the UK government announced their white paper looking at AI policy and regulation. So the report says that an AI index analysis of the legislative records of 127 countries shows that the number of bills containing artificial intelligence that were passed into law grew from just 1 in 2016 to 37 in 2022. An analysis of the parliamentary records on AI in 81 countries likewise shows that mentions of AI in global legislative proceedings have increased nearly 6.5 times since 2016. So this is no great surprise at all. And, that was the lead story on today's pod. Italy banning ChatGPT, and we're going to see more of this in the future, no doubt. As the EU brings its own AI legislation to Parliament and puts it on the books, and America does the same, and China is putting it through the law books as we speak. We can just expect more and more of this interest in regulating AI to come to the fore. So watch this space. It will be interesting to see where we land on that one. And one final takeaway. There is more on this, by the way. So if you want to read the full report, it's about 380 pages long, and I'm not going to pretend I've read all of it in the few days since it came out. But there are a few more highlights. But the last one I want to talk about is something about the sentiment that we feel towards artificial intelligence. How do the general public feel about AI? Well, according to the report, Chinese citizens are among those who feel the most positively about AI products and services, whereas Americans, not so much. In a 2022 Ipsos survey, 78% of Chinese respondents, the highest proportion surveyed, agreed with the statement that products and services using AI have more benefits than drawbacks. After Chinese respondents, Saudi Arabia 76% and India 71% felt the most positive about AI. So, you're really 78% of Chinese, 76 Saudi, 71% India. That's a lot of positivity floating around there about what AI can do for people. Whereas Americans are a little bit more skeptical. Only 35% of those sampled agreed that products or services using AI had more benefits than drawbacks. Now, what that means for adoption of new technologies or how companies need to think about rolling out AI-infused products and services remains to be seen, but it does suggest that there's a degree of skepticism around the power and potential of AI in the US and maybe the wider Western societies as well. That means that we're going to have to act cautiously and not be so techno-optimistic. And I definitely fall into the side of being a techno-optimist. Just something to be aware of if you're evangelizing the benefits of AI. Maybe you'll get a more positive response or a positive reception if you go and do that in China. Well, that's it for the main stories this week. No tool of the week this week because as you're going to hear in the interview that Paul conducted, you're going to hear quite a lot about the power of GPT-4. So without further ado, I'm going to hand off to Paul, who conducted this interview looking at how ChatGPT-4 can be used to boost the productivity of an e-commerce company. Over to you, Paul.
So a bit of a special edition artificially intelligent marketing podcast today, because we are lucky enough to be able to speak with a good friend of mine, Emil Lamprecht. Emil is CEO of Growth Mechanics. He is a co-founder of multiple businesses within that portfolio. He's a startup expert, having built a number of startup incubators over the years and mentored over 800 startups. He's a marketing expert himself, having previously been CMO at Athletic Greens, which is now a $100 million company, as well as a number of other marketing gigs and bits and pieces he's done over the years. And he's just an overall business expert and good guy. I guess the most important thing is he is a fellow AI nerd. So today we're going to talk about some cool stuff. Emil, thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate it.
Lovely to be here, Paul. Thanks for inviting me. And it's going to be very hard not to call you by your shorthand. I just realized I almost called you Avo right off the bat there. So I'll have to get used to calling you Paul on this conversation.
You call me whatever you like, as long as it's nice. Okay. That's probably going to be the hardest bit.
That's the hardest bit. Yeah, for sure.
We're going to talk about two main things for the meal today. The first one we're going to talk about is a ninja marketing application of AI that he's developed, which I think you're all going to find really interesting. So we're going to talk about that, and hopefully it will inspire you as marketers to think about other ways you might use AI outside of the general, oh, I'm going to put some stuff into ChatGPT, which of course many of us have played with. The other thing we're going to talk about is we're going to tap into Emil's role as a business owner and founder and just get his thoughts on how is the emergence of AI really going to drive how businesses need to operate and market themselves over the next 18 months, 24 months and beyond, because obviously things are moving really quickly. So, Emil, let's start with this ninja application that you were telling me about, because it sounded really cool. Take us through what you were doing and why and how you benefited.
Yeah, so I mean, interestingly enough, or I think for me, what's most interesting about it is we did this before the ChatGPT hype. Obviously, aspects of OpenAI and use of their APIs have been around for a while. And one of the cool things is that there have been some tools that implemented some form of availability to that early on. So like we use a tool for a lot of things called coda.io, which if you're familiar with Airtable or Notion is comparable to sort of both of those things or a combination of those things. And part of our portfolio is e-commerce. And in one case, a business we recently acquired is e-commerce with a very large portfolio. We're talking thousands of products across multiple languages, across 4 languages. So English, Spanish, Portuguese, and French, which, okay, sure, we're, a small agile team, and it's a nice idea to, grow that, to have 100 translators to constantly monitor and update every detail of product schema for every language all the time in the highest version of quality. But there are limits to that being pragmatic or realistic. And so last autumn, sort of August, September, we were looking at, okay, how could we, to a certain level of quality and efficiency, leverage existing technology to try and manage and possibly even write or rewrite and republish product schema, whether that be titles, metadata, material information, warnings and recommendations, descriptions, et cetera, et cetera. And we said, well, oh, okay, we play with Coda, and there's currently a little bit of availability built by one of the Coda team members of using the OpenAI API, which at that point was GPT 3.0, I think. I don't think it was at 3.5 at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And let's see what we can do. And the advantage of being able to build and manage a database and an easy to use UI like these tools now allow you to, we sort of figured out a way to import, rewrite or translate as needed entire sets of product schema, concatenate it into end results, including recommendation links to associated product types and things like this, and then push that all the way back into the front end of the store, and sort of dynamically manage our product portfolio and all of that product metadata off-site, but to a certain extent automatically, which was quite a win. I mean, I calculated it at one point that by using this method of translation, we were probably losing, maybe like a 20-25% quality amount, but we were gaining what would normally take in human hours about 1,200 hours to execute. Wow. in any one go. And, we still have to manage it in small batch. It's a lot of data, right? So you can't just do a portfolio of 10,000 products in one go. It takes a progressive amount of import, export, processing, et cetera. But, let's say we do 100 products a week or 1,000 products a week. Over the course of a year, we're saving thousands of human working hours from that. So
let me just play that back to make sure I've understood. You got this e-commerce website where you're selling 5,000 plus products across a bunch of different languages. And then what you've done is you've used access to GPT's API to find a way of effectively automating updates to the product descriptions and stuff across all those products in all those languages, with GPT taking care effectively of the writing of those and the translation of those so that humans didn't have to. Is that a fair summary of what you did?
Yeah, exactly. And there's actually, of course, since the sort of hype of AI began in November, December, there's of course an increased availability of similar things on most e-commerce things natively now, right? So there's WordPress plugins, there's Shopify apps, there's BigCommerce apps, there's even PrestaShop modules that exist for this type of stuff within certain limitations. I think even that the fact that those exist is a way to do some of the work, either automated or push button generation. I think the difference between that and what we built was that we can manage entire sections of the portfolio also because we control the prompt structure. So I'm having, we're writing the prompt into the kind of database command that processes each product so that for each language, for each product type, it is producing a prompt specific in style and cadence and interest to that particular product in that context, which is not something you can really do with just sort of the plug and play apps that you find for any e-commerce system at the moment. So I don't know if those apps will find a way to mature to that. To be honest, it seems unlikely because, marketers always want the laziest version of things. So I'm not even sure it will occur to most marketers to try and be that specific with generated plugins on e-commerce. But for us, it was really important to kind of have some stylistic control. And, even with the revolution of, the thousands of AI tools that have appeared in the last 2 months, nothing comes close that I've seen so far to being able to produce the result we're doing with a very simple API call through a Coda doc. So
how long did it take you? I realize there's an optimization part to this where you make sure it works as you want, but how long did it take you to basically build that?
That's its own question.
Like, is it a day? Is it a week? Is it 6 months of work to build something like this? What does it look like?
I think to set up the initial version, just to prove the concept, I think it probably took, between me and another team member playing around with it, it probably took us 2 days, a day, to get like, oh yeah, this could work. To get to that point of, oh yeah, this could work.
Right.
To get it really nailed down, it took a number of iterations, and those iterations are still happening. I mean, today we realized, for instance, just as an example, a Portuguese friend of mine was going over some longer form stuff that we had produced through this system and informed me in a very kind, polite way. Anytime it writes something in Portuguese over a certain length, it assumes a Brazilian style of Portuguese.
Interesting.
Which I, not being a native Portuguese speaker, is not something I picked up on when I was reading various Portuguese texts coming out of the system.
Right.
So, but because we built the system the way it is, I can go back to where we have isolated the language prompts. And instead of saying in Portuguese, I'm going to edit that to say in Portuguese as you would find in Portugal, not in Brazil. And, customize that prompt even further to that sort of specificity. So these sorts of micro iterations are happening all the time. We've managed, since sort of starting to translate the product portfolio, we've managed to expand that to, okay, we also have to translate quite a lot of product information into social posts in different languages for different social accounts that we run. And so we've now started building out those layers. And then we're also then extending those integrations and connecting that to schedulers and saying, okay, well, can you go through a generative and human review process that then pushes all the way straight through to the schedule, and then you're done. And that's all based on this one sort of centralized system we've built.
So again, very automated. GPT is writing social posts promoting the products. You want a human reviewing them for quality, but then once they're approved, they get pushed through and automatically built into the scheduled stream of posts that are going to go out across the social profiles for the business. Is that
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I particularly for the social stuff, for the product stuff on the mass that we have, we will mature to having a human layer on top of that generative one to sort of approve and review before it pushes all the way back through, because it does make a huge difference. At first glance, text looks the same, but once you get used to seeing AI text, even once you get really good at stylistic prompts, you can still always tell it's AI. And so will search engines and everything else, right? So it's important to have that human layer. For now, we just have that human layer on the social side, but we've gotten very good at how the sort of generative human review publication cycle should work just in the past couple of weeks. And so, what would take normally would have taken someone probably a couple hours to write, multilingual versions of social posts about a series of products. Takes a few minutes, then some editing and quick review, and then pushes straight all the way through.
Awesome. It also comes to mind that because you've got control over the prompts, which some of these sort of third-party plugins might not have, I guess you could end up doing some quite interesting stuff, running things like A/B tests to see if having a certain type of style of description works better than another. But you can also run those A/B tests at quite an interesting scale across different product groups because you don't have to manually do all the writing of the different descriptions.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we're definitely not at the point to do that scientifically enough yet, but it's if you look at the admin doc of things to do, it's there
on the list.
It's definitely on the list. We'd love to get to the point where we could do that. And part of that is a performance question, right? Like especially when you're processing this many requests, because we're using, we're not training a self-hosted version. We're using the API one call at a time, right? So we dump in 100 products. For each product, it's making 28 separate requests and then collating those requests into a final series of outcomes, right? So it's a lot happens for every product still, which takes a lot of time to process. And then, the database has to actually load that visually so that we can interact with it for the human review and so forth. So like there's some performance questions in being able to really do this at scale with all of those considerations in place. But, again, even to just take your top 100 products of a portfolio of several thousand and manage to do this process, which we've now done, that and beyond has proven invaluable.
Amazing. So there you have it, marketers. What creative things can you think of to help scale your work outside of some of the sort of commercial tools that become available? Emil's told us a wonderful story there about figuring out how to massively scale product description changes across a wide array of e-commerce products in multiple languages, and then using AI to also write social posts to promote them. Hopefully that will inspire people to go away and think, wonder how I could apply that type of approach to my own work. So Emil, I really appreciate you sharing that with me.
No, of course. I actually have one more point to add on to that, which comes to mind now, which is just that, like, at the status that this business is for us, we just wouldn't have done it.
Right.
Like, this isn't something that, like, budget-wise, scale-wise, operationally, we could have done humanly. It would have just waited until hopefully the business through other means had advanced and matured and gotten to the point where it could then invest in that transition or that process. So the most important thing about here is not that this is the best end result, right? Like I said, quality wise, it's probably 70 out of 100, 80 out of 100, right? But if you're going to kind of look at that from an Occam's razor's lens, if we can do that now and get 80% of the results, that value at this stage is so much higher than what we would eventually be able to invest in human wise if we ever got to that point with the business.
Right.
So like, especially for like smaller, low budget or low operating teams, or, smaller operating teams, it's about like maximizing efficiency, right? It's about how do you look at it through the assistant lens and say, okay, if I could get an assistant to do anything, what would it be? And then, yes, you have to design that. And there's a lot of system design and logic that went into that process. You do have to be good at that. But if you're good at it and creative enough, you can get some pretty excellent outcomes. Yeah,
no, I appreciate you adding that extra detail, and that concept of, if I had an assistant, what would I ask them? I think is a muscle that a lot of us are going to have to develop when we're looking at our business and marketing challenges. And maybe we can use that as a segue to, I know you're a deep thinker and you've been doing a lot of thinking, and we've had a number of discussions recently about what the emergence of certainly generative AI tools, but a lot of other AI-enabled tools is going to do in terms of having an impact on how people run their businesses and market their businesses. So what do you see happening? How do you think this is going to play out over the next months and years as these tools take hold?
Well, first things first, we all know marketers will ruin everything because no one's better at it than we are. So that's number one.
Right.
But the reason I start with that is because that's actually the lesson, right? So like right now, what we see happening in the AI market is people creating wonderfully intelligent or simple AI tools to more efficiently do or maximize current standards of marketing.
Right.
Which very quickly means that those standards will become more saturated and very, very much more quickly irrelevant.
Right.
Right. That is not the lens we should be looking at this. It's not about how do we use AI to maximize the kind of performance or automated pieces of marketing that work now. It's about when this shift takes place, and it might be 18 months or 2 years or 4 years, doesn't really matter. What is then the marketing things that will survive or emerge on the other end of that? And that's where I've, as a portfolio, we have different companies that operate in different ways. And we're, everyone's feeling a bit of the recession. Everyone's feeling the AI tech pressure on top of that, which makes it more amplified.
Right.
So everyone in our teams are going, whoa, wait, what do we have to do? Like,
right.
So I just start printing content like mad using ChatGPT. Is that what I should be doing? Like writing 10 articles a day instead of one good one?
Yeah.
That's literally the types of questions that marketers and even non-marketers in our team are asking right now. And I think that's probably what a lot of people are feeling, some version of, conscious or not,
right,
in the space right now. And so we've had to kind of look a little bit deeper and start to think, okay, what works now that will probably work no matter what happens with AI? That's question number one. Okay. So what will probably not be affected fundamentally as a marketing style or tactic, regardless of AI? And then two, once AI makes certain types of obvious marketing probably not work as well.
Right.
What will be the new tactics that might emerge from that? And that's a bit more sort of hedging and risk betting and like kind of trying to use your creative brain as a marketer to think through to the next systemic move.
Yeah.
And then the third one is, regardless of number two, if people start to change their technical behavior, right? So if plugins on ChatGPT get really sticky, which means people move away from dedicated solution point and click interaction. They move away from direct, 2 to 5 word search. And they actually do eventually start to adopt a more lingual form of interacting with multiple services. What will then the knock-on effects of that be on other channels or stable quote unquote systems that we use, right? So we did a little bit of very rough math, right? Please, no one quote me on these numbers, please. But some very rough math on what happens if an average of around 2 or just over 2% of the English-speaking market changes from dedicated UI-based interaction and using search engines to using lingual platform, whether that be ChatGPT and plugins or something like it.
Right.
2% moves from the way everyone operates at the moment to exclusively that English market only.
So even that you could consider as like early adopters. That's not a huge amount percentage-wise, right?
Yeah. But it's like, a couple 100 million people move their everyday behavior over there. What happens? Well, one of the things that happens is ads almost double in price for almost every single niche.
Right.
Because that is the 2% that is digitally active enough that they are sought out by most advertising categories. And so if you just remove 2% of that population, that entire sort of stable platform of ad performance and how that's calculated and generated starts to buckle. And so you suddenly get, we're already seeing crazy price increases in most ad platforms the past 2 years. This isn't necessarily new. It's just its potential to be accelerated massively by a very small transitional adoption of the population to this new type of behavior could have massive implications. Now, if Google Ads doubles in price, particularly for e-commerce, half of e-commerce collapses.
Because you
It's the
can't make any
primary.
margin on it anymore.
No,
Yeah.
it's the primary channel. Like ROAS on Google Ads and Google Shopping Ads is like the primary channel for the majority of mid to at scale e-commerce platforms. So they either have to kind of get way ahead of that and start changing how those tactics work now, so that in 2-3 years it's a much less reliant channel, or they're going to wait too long and it's going to start to collapse and they're going to struggle and a lot of them are going to die. What does that do to the sort of economic stability of business and having a startup and all of that? These are sort of the existential crises that we're considering in this equation, right? But it's those sort of three core points that we've been looking at.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think the first one is definitely the immediate reaction I see in a lot of places because it's practical and applicable quickly, right? You can log into ChatGPT or some other tool. You can start to have a play with it. You can get it generating content for you very quickly. And all of a sudden you feel like I should be doing this no matter what, because surely it's better and more efficient. And we've talked on the podcast previously, and I know you and I have spoken about what happens when you get a deluge of AI generated content that may not be that well curated or edited, and it just is junk. And, hopefully the cream rises to the top, and most of that is at best AI enabled. I don't think it will be AI generated. So I think there's some stuff in that. In terms of looking at the wider ramifications, like you just described, I don't think most marketers are even thinking about number one, if I'm honest. I think some are, and I think that proportion's growing. The number of people who are thinking about number two is very low, and the number of people who are looking like number three is probably just you, Emil.
It's probably just me. Yeah, it's probably just me having an existential crisis about something happening in 4 years. That sounds about on point.
Right. But I think, when you're trying to predict the future and manage your business and your marketing strategy, you have to keep these things in mind. So I think that is hopefully going to give our listeners real food for thought. Where are you, listeners, on your journey from 1 to 2 to 3 there? Maybe we can summarize those in a word, Emil, right? Like number 1 is using tools to produce content now.
Yeah.
Number 2 is how do things change as people start to use these tools and how people actually search for information changes. And then 3 is what happens to the rest of the business ecosystems as a knock-on from that factor in terms of how to existing ad platforms naturally adapt to changes in user behavior, the emergence of new ad platforms, etc. So is that a fair summary?
Yeah, I think the tweak and review of 1 and 2, and at this point I've been waffling so much I've probably lost my own threads there a couple times, but the one thing that's most important to recall is just like the tools that are being pushed upon us to use now are those that amplify current strategies, but that doesn't insulate you against once everyone is using those strategies and they're saturated, no longer relevant, right? So that's kind of where point 2 is leading.
Yeah.
And that then leads to the inevitable existential crises of point 3. But like it's really more about like, if you're going to be a good marketer, you have to stop being a lazy marketer, and you have to think, okay, if everyone does this, what am I going to do? Right.
That's a great question.
What are the things that are still going to work regardless of this? And so I think an inevitable question from someone listening to this, I hope, would be, well, what are those things? And we could go probably on a separate rant about what some of those things may be. I can leave a little like nugget hanging here, which is that if it's human, it's probably going to stay, right? There's a level to that is real, right? And you have to think of human on many levels. Partnerships are human.
Agreed.
Communities that exist within current constructs of a lot of self-identity and alignment are human. So access to those, which are partnership, are human. Hint, hint, hint. Which we already knew from the past couple of years, right? We see performance-based marketing kind of collapsing. We're returning to sort of more of a brand, human-driven thing anyway.
Yeah.
And now AI is just pushing that all.
Going to accelerate that. I love that. I think we're about on time now, Emil. So let's leave that dangling in people's minds. I want to come back and maybe we'll do this again in a month or so's time and really dig into some of those other number 3 scenarios, because I think they're really interesting. But I think for now, hopefully everyone, that's given you something to chew on. Emil, thank you so much for your time today. I always love hanging out with you. Good to speak with you. And yeah, hopefully we'll do this again soon.
Yeah, no, it's been a pleasure as always. I love doing this. So thanks for hearing out my existential ramblings, and thanks to your audience and to your audience as well. Like, chase us down with questions, especially in the potential that we might do a follow-up conversation. I'd love to hear what listeners are actually thinking about or feeling when they start considering this for themselves. Great
stuff. Yeah, completely agree. I'm sure you'll find this on the socials, on the LinkedIns and the Twitters when we put it out there. So we'd love to hear your questions on those channels. Thanks, Emil. I'll speak to you soon.
All right, will do. Thanks, Paul. Take care.
Thank you for listening to Artificially Intelligent Marketing. To stay on top of the latest trends, tips, and tools in the world of marketing AI, be sure to subscribe. We look forward to seeing you again next week.